Have you ever wondered why some people manage to stick in the minds of men, while others are quickly forgotten? The answer could lie in the deep psychological principles that Carl Jung discovered. When we understand how the male psyche works, we discover that there are unconscious patterns that determine who stays in his thoughts and who disappears into oblivion. The fascinating thing is that these dynamics do not depend on superficial tricks, but on genuine psychological connections that awaken the most authentic longing. In this video, I will reveal to you the 8 fundamental aspects based on Jungian psychology that make a man unable to stop thinking about you, even when he is far away. Get ready to discover why certain behaviors trigger such a powerful level of longing that it's virtually impossible to ignore. When we talk about what makes a man deeply miss someone, we must delve into one of Carl Jung's most powerful concepts, the shadow archetype. This psychological element represents all those parts that man has repressed or does not know about himself. The fascinating thing is that when you interact with a man without constantly trying to please, without showing only your perfect side, you allow him to connect with those hidden parts of his personality. The shadow is not a negative thing as many think. On the contrary, it contains vital energy and undeveloped aspects that crave expression. When a person manages to touch this dimension in a man, he awakens an almost magnetic curiosity. It is not about manipulation, but about authenticity. When you show yourself as you really are, with your lights and shadows, with your vulnerabilities and strengths, you generate a space where he can also be authentic. This process of mutual recognition creates a connection that goes far beyond the superficial. Jung discovered that human beings deeply long to be seen in our totality, not just in our social mask. When a man finds someone who can see beyond his defenses, who can accept even those parts that he himself rejects, a bond is created that remains in his emotional memory. Shadow activation happens at unexpected times, when you show a clear boundary, when you express a different opinion, when you are not afraid to show your own imperfections. These moments of truth create an imprint on the male psyche that remains even in the distance. It's not that you're activating something artificial, but that you're allowing a level of connection that they rarely experience in their everyday interactions. Jung observed that men tend to live more disconnected from their emotions due to social conditioning. Therefore, when they find someone who allows them to access that emotional dimension without judgment, without ridiculing them, an oasis of authenticity is created to which they will want to return again and again. It is not emotional dependence. It is recognition of a space where they can fully exist. The shadow also contains those creative, playful, and spontaneous aspects that many men have sacrificed for the sake of productivity and social success. When you allow them to express those dimensions, when you create spaces where they can be playful, creative, or simply relax without meeting expectations, you touch on a deep need that they themselves do not even recognize they have. This archetype is also related to mystery, not the artificial mystery of playing at disappearing or being inaccessible, but the true mystery of being a complex person with depth, with nuances. When a man perceives that there is more to discover in you, that you are not predictable or one-dimensional, his natural curiosity is activated. This curiosity is one of the most powerful engines of longing and longing. The shadow also connects with the ability to see the unrealized potential in the other. When you can see not only who a man is now, but who he could become, you strike a deep chord that sparks both gratitude and fascination. This recognition of hidden potential creates a bond that transcends the immediate and is projected into shared future possibilities. The space for individuation. The concept of individuation is central to Jungian psychology. It refers to the process by which a person becomes a psychologically complete and integrated individual. When you allow a man to have his space for this process, paradoxically, you create the conditions for him to miss you intensely. It is not a matter of physically distancing themselves for the sake of strategy, but of deeply respecting their personal development process. Jung discovered that human beings need both connection and autonomy. When a relationship allows for both dimensions, it becomes extraordinarily valuable. The common mistake is to think that to keep someone interested, you have to be always present, always available. The psychological truth is just the opposite. The space to breathe, to reflect, to connect with oneself is what allows one to genuinely value the presence of the other. Individuation implies that both people maintain their own interests, passions, and paths of development. When a man perceives that you don't try to fully merge with him, that you don't abandon your own path through the relationship, he experiences a form of deep respect. This respect creates a much more lasting type of attraction than emotional dependence or the initial romantic fusion. The space for individuation also means allowing each person to process their emotions at their own pace. Men, due to both biological and cultural factors, tend to process certain emotions differently. When you respect these rhythms without pressure, without demanding immediate responses, you create an environment where they feel safe to explore their own feelings. This space also implies not constantly trying to fix the other. Jung emphasized that each person must face his or her own shadows and challenges. When you allow a man to go through his own processes without constantly rescuing him, you are offering him an invaluable gift: confidence in his own ability to grow and overcome obstacles. This trust generates a type of gratitude that translates into longing when you are not present. Individuation is also related to the ability to be good with yourself. When a man perceives that you do not depend on him for your happiness, that you have a rich and full life in your own right, he experiences a sense of freedom that paradoxically brings him closer. It is not manipulation, it is a psychological truth. We value more what we freely choose than what we feel as an obligation. This space also allows mutual curiosity to flourish. When each person has their own experiences, when there are new things to share, the relationship maintains its freshness. Jung observed that the most fulfilling relationships are those in which both people continue to discover each other, where there is always something new to learn from the other. Respect for individuation also implies accepting the natural cycles of closeness and distance. All human relationships have these rhythms, these ebbs and flows. When you accept these cycles without drama, without interpreting them as rejection, you create an environment of emotional tranquility that is deeply appealing to the male psyche, that often fears being overwhelmed by constant emotional demands. The activation of the anima, the inner feminine principle. Jungian theory presents us with one of the most fascinating concepts to understand why a man can miss you intensely: the anima. Jung discovered that every man possesses within himself an unconscious feminine principle that powerfully influences his emotional attractions and connections. This anima is not simply an abstract concept, but an actual psychic force that determines what kind of feminine presence will resonate deeply with it. When you interact with a man from your authenticity, without trying to fit into stereotypes or expectations, you can activate aspects of his anima that have been dormant or repressed. This activation creates a sense of deep recognition, as if I have been unknowingly looking for you. It is not about being perfect or adapting to an ideal, but just the opposite. It is your unique authenticity that awakens this connection at the level of the collective unconscious. The anima has different levels of development in each man. In its less evolved forms, it can manifest as purely physical attraction or idealized romantic fantasies. But when a man has done enough inner work, his anima matures into a capacity for deep and genuine emotional connection. Your presence can catalyze this evolution, offering him a mirror where he can recognize and develop deeper aspects of his emotional nature. Jung observed that the anima functions as a bridge to the male unconscious. When a man finds someone who allows him to access his emotions, his intuition, his capacity for emotional intimacy without feeling judged, he experiences a transformative inner liberation. This process creates an association between your presence and a sense of inner freedom that will make them crave your company even when you're away. Men are often unaware of how their anima influences their attractions. They may be inexplicably attracted to or intrigued by you without fully understanding why. This unconscious connection has far more power than any conscious strategy for generating attraction. You are not manipulating anything. You are simply allowing a resonance to be established at the level of the unconscious that has a magnetic effect. Anima is also related to creativity and inspiration. Historically, many creative men have recognized that their connections with certain women sparked their artistic or innovative ability. When a man associates your presence with a blossoming of his own creative potential, he will experience a form of longing that goes beyond simple romantic or physical desire. This archetype also explains why depth of character is so appealing. In the long run, contrary to superficial stereotypes, Jungian psychology reveals that men deeply yearn for connections that challenge them to grow, that invite them to explore larger dimensions of existence. When you represent this possibility of consciousness expansion, you become a meaningful presence that remains in your thoughts. The anima is also related to the ability to see beyond social masks. When you can recognize and value aspects of man that others do not see, when you can appreciate qualities that perhaps he himself underestimates, you create a connection that transcends convention. This form of recognition generates a deep gratitude that manifests itself as longing when you are not present. The principle of contrast and valuation. Jungian psychology teaches us that the human psyche works by contrast. We value what we have when we experience its absence. This principle, though simple, reveals a profound truth about why men miss certain people more intensely. It is not a matter of using power games or emotional manipulation, but of understanding how psychological assessment works naturally. When you are constantly available, when there is no room for the contrast between your presence and your absence to arise, the male psyche has no opportunity to experience the sense of appreciation that comes with natural intermittency. Jung observed that all meaningful human experiences involve rhythms and cycles, day and night, work and rest, connection and solitude. These natural contrasts allow for deeper appreciation. This principle explains why maintaining your own life, your own interests and spaces is not only healthy for you, but also creates the conditions for a man to value shared time more deeply. When you have commitments that are important to you, when you don't abandon your passions and friendships, you're creating a natural contrast that intensifies the value of moments together. The contrast also manifests itself in the balance between showing genuine interest and maintaining a healthy respect for your own boundaries. When a man perceives that your interest in him is a free choice, not a desperate need, he experiences a kind of paradoxical security. He knows that you are with him because you want to, not because you need validation or because you have no other options. This chosen freedom creates a much more powerful kind of connection than dependence, Jung also observed that humans tend to take for granted what is always available. It is a natural tendency of the psyche, not a character flaw. When you allow spaces of natural absence, not artificial or manipulative, you are working with this psychological tendency, not against it. These spaces allow for conscious appreciation to emerge that might otherwise fall asleep in the routine. The principle of contrast also relates to our tendency to complete incomplete patterns. When there are natural spaces in interaction, the male mind tends to fill it by thinking about you, remembering shared moments, anticipating future encounters. This active mental process creates a psychological presence that persists even in physical absence. It's not that you're manipulating their thoughts, it's that you're allowing this natural process to occur. This principle also explains why abrupt or artificial endings to conversations rarely generate genuine interest. The male psyche responds much better to natural cycles of connection that end at a high point, leaving a feeling of wanting more. It is not about arbitrarily cutting off conversations, but about respecting the natural cycles of energy and interest that all meaningful human interactions have. Jung also noted that valuation arises when we perceive that something or someone has intrinsic value independent of us. When a man sees that you are valued by others, that you have abilities of your own, that your life has purpose and meaning in its own right, he experiences a form of external validation of what he already intuited, that you are someone special. This perception intensifies the desire to stay connected to you. Contrast also means alternating between different facets of your personality. When a man can experience both your funny side and your emotional depth, both your independence and your capacity for intimacy, both your strength and your vulnerability, it creates an internal image of you that is multidimensional and therefore much more interesting and memorable than a one-dimensional profile. The projection of the animus and deep compatibility. Just as men have an anima, Jung discovered that women possess an animus, the male counterpart in their unconscious psyche. When we understand how the interaction between your animus and a man's conscious personality works, we find fundamental clues as to why some men feel such a deep connection that they can't stop thinking about you, even at a distance. The animus represents qualities such as objectivity, direct action, logic, and the ability to argue that we all have regardless of our gender. When you have healthily developed your animus, you project an inner security and a capacity for independent thought that is deeply attractive. It's not a performance or a strategy, but a genuine integration of these qualities into your personality. Jung observed a fascinating phenomenon. When two people meet, not only do their conscious personalities interact, but so do these inner archetypes. When your well-developed animus interacts with a man's conscious personality, it creates a psychological resonance that goes far beyond superficial attraction. It's a feeling of recognition on a deep level, as if something in it recognizes something in you that completes an unconscious pattern. This archetypal compatibility explains why we sometimes feel immediate, inexplicable connections with certain people. It is not just physical chemistry or compatibility of interests, but a synchrony at the level of the inner archetypes. When a man experiences this synchronicity with you, it will create a lasting impression that will remain in his mind long after your physical departure. The well-integrated animus also allows you to communicate in a language that naturally resonates with the male mind. It is not a matter of manipulating or speaking like a man, but of accessing a clarity and precision in communication that creates bridges of immediate understanding. This clarity creates a sense of relief in many men, who often feel that they must decipher indirect or emotional communications. Jung also noted that animus is connected to our ability to set healthy boundaries. When a man perceives that you have clear boundaries, that you don't allow disrespect, that you value your time and energy, he experiences a kind of respect that paradoxically increases his interest. These boundaries do not create emotional distance, but rather set the framework for a more authentic and deeper connection. The projection of the animus also explains why emotional independence is so magnetic. When you don't depend on the man for your validation or emotional well-being, when you have your own inner center of stability, you offer him the freedom to connect with you from genuine desire, not from obligation or guilt. This freedom creates a psychological space where he can genuinely miss you, without the weight of feeling responsible for your happiness. The animus is also related to our capacity for adventure and calculated risk. When you share experiences with a man that involves some degree of challenge or novelty, it creates a more intense emotional bond than that which arises from purely comfortable or predictable interactions. These shared experiences create vivid memories that will come back to your mind when you're not around. Healthy development of the animus also allows you to see man as he really is, not as a projection of your needs or fantasies. This clear and realistic view is profoundly validating. When a man feels that you see him clearly and yet accept him, he experiences a form of recognition that he rarely finds in his everyday relationships. The activation of the self and the connection with the purpose. The self, or self in Jungian terminology, represents the organizing center of the total psyche, conscious and unconscious. It is the archetype of totality and integration. When you manage to activate or connect with a man's self, you are touching the deepest and most significant dimension of his being. This connection generates a type of longing that transcends the merely romantic or physical. Jung discovered that the self manifests itself through symbols of wholeness and has a numinous, almost spiritual quality. When a man finds in you someone who recognizes and respects his search for meaning, his life purpose, he experiences a sense of deep alliance. It's not about you sharing exactly the same goals or ambitions, but about being able to see and honor the importance they have to him. The self is also related to our search for authenticity. When a man can be completely authentic in your presence without the need for social masks or pretense, he experiences profound relief. This space of authenticity becomes precious, a refuge in a world that often demands conformity and constant adaptation. The absence of this space will be felt intensely when you are not present. Jung observed that the self constantly seeks balance and the integration of opposites. When you are able to accept the contradictions and complexities in a man, when you do not pigeonhole him into rigid roles or limiting expectations, you are facilitating this process of integration. This acceptance of their full nature creates a bond that goes far beyond superficial attractions. The connection with the self also implies recognizing and respecting the time proper to each development process. Men, like all human beings, have their own rhythms of growth and transformation. When you respect these rhythms, when you don't push or impose your expectations for change, you create an environment where authentic development can occur. This patience and respect generate a deep gratitude that manifests itself as longing. The self is also related to our ability to project into the future. When a man can imagine a meaningful future that includes you, when his vision of life finds resonance or complementarity with yours, a psychological bond is created that transcends the present moment. This shared projection makes him think of you not only in terms of what you have experienced, but of future possibilities that he longs to explore together. Jung also noted that the self seeks creative expression. When you genuinely support a Man's creative expression, whether in his work, hobbies, or personal projects, you are connecting with a deep need in his psyche. This support is not superficial flattery, but real understanding of the value these expressions have for him. The absence of this kind of understanding will be felt intensely when you are not present. The self also relates to our need for transcendence, to be part of something bigger than ourselves. When you share with a man deep conversations about the meaning of life, when you explore philosophical or spiritual questions together, when you can contemplate together the mystery of existence, you create a kind of intimacy that few people experience. This level of connection creates a lasting imprint on your emotional memory. Self-activation also involves a recognition of the core values that guide your life. When you can see and appreciate the principles that are truly important to him, even when they differ from yours, you are honoring an essential dimension of his identity. This recognition generates a feeling of being truly seen that few experience in their daily relationships. To close this video, I want to leave you with a final provocation. What if instead of obsessing over superficial techniques for being estranged, we focused on creating psychological connections so deep that our absence feels like an unfillable void? The real magic is not in manipulating, but in connecting with an authenticity so powerful that it becomes unforgettable. Do you dare to leave the games to discover the transformative power of a soul-resonant presence? Jung's legacy shows us that this is the path to connections that transcend time and distance.